in the short run, then I know that my average cost will look like my average variable cost did in the short run, and my marginal cost will look like my marginal cost did in the short run too, these nice U-shaped curves here. So I wish I could get that, because then I don't have to remember two concepts. Well, this is actually going to work out quite nicely, and we're going to draw one that looks like that, but the reason that the long-run total cost curve may be looking like this has nothing to do with diminishing marginal product of one input directly, and since there are no fixed costs, it has nothing to do with the fact that you're spreading fixed costs over more and more units. The only thing that drives the shape of the long-run total cost curve is going to be returns to scale. So returns to scale, as you remember, of course, simply say, if I double all inputs, and I exactly double output, I have constant returns to scale. If I double all inputs, I more than double output, I have increasing returns to scale, yay. If I double all inputs and I less than double outputs, I have decreasing returns to scale. I remember that concept, Max. Well, how does this relate to total cost and average cost and marginal costs in the long run? Okay, so these top three graphs here are going to be total cost. The bottom three graphs are going to be the corresponding marginal cost and average cost curves in the long run. The first one I'm going to do here is constant returns to scale. Then one that has, hold on, which one am I doing next? Increasing returns to scale, so the one I want to do next. Increasing returns to scale, and then decreasing returns to scale. Okay, constant returns to scale. If I double all inputs, what happens to my total cost of inputs? Doubles, right? So if you buy twice as much mayonnaise and twice as many potatoes as before, you spend twice as much on inputs. If that doubling of inputs exactly doubles outputs, right? Okay, let me try this again. I need to be very clear here. I'm sorry. So constant returns to scale, you double inputs. We've decided that doubles costs. And what else do we know about constant returns to scale if I double inputs? You double output, right? So constant returns to scale is you double inputs, that doubles costs, and that doubles output. So if you want to double outputs for a constant returns to scale technology, what happens to your total costs? They double, right? Because we said doubling inputs doubles costs, and that also doubles output. So doubling outputs for a constant returns to scale technology doubles costs. So the total cost curve for constant returns to scale production function, and why aren't you drawing, is a straight line. How about increasing returns to scale? So increasing returns to scale, you double inputs. What happens to your cost of inputs? That was a trick question. All right. If you double inputs, what always happens to your costs? If you buy twice as much, it always doubles, right? So it's a trick question, but it's good to check your intuition here. So if you double inputs, your costs double. But what happens to your outputs? They more than double, right? So what happens to your total costs is for doubling your output, you need to less than double your input, right? So your increasing returns to scale total cost function looks something like this. For decreasing returns to scale, I won't bore you to tears. If you double inputs, you double your costs, your input costs, but your output less than doubles, right? So in order to double your output, you need to more than double your inputs. So your total costs look something like this, right? They're not drawn to scale. So that's great. Those are some nice total cost curves here. What about average costs and marginal costs? So if you double your output and your costs exactly double, what happens to the average cost of production? Stays the same, right? So you double output, you double your cost of production, your average costs of production stay the same. So for constant returns to scale, the average cost of production is constant. What happens, bless you, to the marginal cost of production? Well, to the marginal cost of production, if you increase your inputs proportionally, right, producing one more output always costs exactly as much as it did producing the last unit of output, because average costs are exactly constant. So the marginal cost of production here is exactly equal to the average cost of production, and the graph is exactly the same. What about increasing returns to scale? If you double your inputs, right, you double your costs, but you more than double output, what happens to the average cost of production as you increase output? Go up or go down? It goes down, right? This is the happy thing, right? You increase production and your average cost of production drop. And this is careful. We're not thinking about technological change here or innovation or anything fancy in glossy magazines, right? All we're thinking about here is at one point in time, increasing returns to scale is a technology where you double all inputs, you more than double output. So your average costs of production are falling. Now, if your average costs of production are falling, what do you know about marginal cost of production? So if your GPA is falling, how have you been doing lately? Worse, right? So your recent grades are worse than what you've done so far. So if average costs are falling, right, the marginal cost of production has to be below average costs. So the marginal cost curve here is simply below the average cost curve. And these are sketches, they're not drawn to scale. What about decreasing returns to scale? You double inputs, you double costs of your inputs, you less than double output. So as you increase output, the average cost of each unit produced goes up, right? It's the exact opposite of what happens with increasing returns to scale. So your average cost curve looks something like that. If in IES 106 you do better than you've done before on average, what happens to your GPA? It goes up, right? So if average costs are rising, marginal cost has to be above average cost. So that's pretty neat, right? We like this a lot. So now we get total cost curves that could be linear, they could be sort of hill-shaped, or they could be half U-shaped. But what about that curve you drew earlier, Max? How about this long-run cost curve that looks something like this? You drew this, right? Inverse U, and then U. And we should label our axes nicely. What about that total cost curve? So what happens right here? It starts with in as an inflection point, right? So what do you think happens to production at this inflection point? This one's worth $2.50, $3 because I don't have any quarters. You gotta raise your hand though, because I can see you. Yeah, it does. That's exactly right, right? So at low levels of production, I think I've given you money before, right? Yeah, twice. All right, here. Well, I'm happy to subsidize your tuition. Here you go. This is, that paid for about 30 seconds of this lecture, I think, at this point. But the point here is, what's your name? Emily. All right. See how much money Emily can make by raising her hand and answering questions correctly. This is great. All right, so here, roughly technically there's a little bit of shadiness going on right around the inflection point, but over this range of production, your total cost curve looks something like an increasing returns to scale total cost curve. Over the range over here, it looks more like a decreasing returns to scale total cost curve. So over this range of output, this firm has increasing returns to scale. Over this range of output, this firm has decreasing returns to scale. So the reason you would get this nice sort of S-shaped cost curve right here is because in the long run, this firm has regions of production where it has increasing returns to scale at low levels of output, and then as it goes past some threshold level of output, it goes to decreasing returns to scale. So that's how you would get a total cost curve that looks like that. In the short run, the reason you get this S-shaped cost curve is because of marginal product of labor, essentially. So what does this mean for average costs? I know you know the shoelace at this point, right? So this is pretty neat. I know that average costs go from being decreasing to increasing at the point where the line from the origin is exactly tangent to the total cost curve. Let's call this Q2. And the marginal cost curve goes from being decreasing to increasing at Q1 at the inflection point. So Q1 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's try and draw this to scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, roughly here. So this is Q1, and Q2 is 2 over Q2. Okay, so if I wanted to draw my average and marginal cost in the long run, I know that average variable or average total cost, because we're in the long run, goes from being decreasing to increasing right here. And marginal cost goes from being decreasing to increasing right at Q1. And do I know another point where this marginal cost curve has to go? Goes through the minimum of average variable cost, right? Because at this point right here, the slope of the total cost curve, which is marginal cost, is exactly equal to the slope of the line connecting the origin to the total cost curve, right? So at this point, Q2, your marginal cost is equal to average cost, and the picture looks something like this. So in the long run, we actually do get this picture that I showed you over here for average variable cost and marginal cost. But the reason for that is simply because you have increasing returns to scale at low levels of production and decreasing returns to scale at high levels of production. So what that means in the long run, it doesn't necessarily have to look like this, right? If you have increasing returns to scale everywhere, it looks more like a hill. If you have decreasing returns to scale everywhere, it looks like a right side of a U. If you have constant returns to scale everywhere, it's linear. So that's pretty nice, right? So why are these two curves sometimes S-shaped? I think we have developed a pretty good understanding. Okay. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. And I'm about to draw the craziest picture we'll see all semester. It's just messy, right? But it's actually, I think, fairly intuitive. So the last cost thing I really want to talk about before we talk about firms, shutdown, and optimal output decisions, and then we can finally let markets fail in a lecture or two. I'm looking forward to it. I still want to talk about the relationship between costs in the long run and in the short run. They are different, all right? So are they always different, or can they be the same? Well, in the short run, costs are going to be greater than long run, usually. But can they be the same at a level of output? Let's think about that for a second. So let's go back to this picture I drew earlier. Here's my 100-unit isoquant. Here's my isocost curve. Let me make this easy for myself here. 10.5. So if you're in the long run, can you do any better, or can you produce 100 units at a lower cost than whatever the label on this isocost line is? Can you do any better? No way, right? This is the best you can do in the long run. In the short run, could you do any better at this level of output? There is no way you can do any better ever, right? So the point here is if you're producing at the optimal point for a given output level, it doesn't matter whether you're in the short run or in the long run. In the short run and in the long run, the average costs are going to be the same, right? So in the short run, the average cost is the same here. In the long run, the average cost of producing this amount is the same if you are using the right level of capital. What do you mean by the right level of capital? Well, the level of capital I'm using to produce here at this point, right, let's call it K star, that's the magic level of capital right here. That's exactly the right amount of capital you should be using to produce 100 units. Now, what does the wrong level of capital look like? It looks like this. So at 200 units, actually I did okay. Let me try one more time. Like this. You want to make sure your isoquant comes down below the right level of capital here. So if I expand production in the long run here, again, I would just simply take my isocost curve, shift it out parallel until I get to a point where I'm exactly tangent. Yeah, this is going to be fine. Not drawn very nicely, but again, the tangency point right here, where now you're using a different level of capital. Right? This different level of capital expansion in the long run, for 200 units, you can't do better than using K double star units of capital and L double star units of labor. Can you do any better? No way, right? You expanded in the long run, you chose the lowest isocost curve that's exactly tangent to that isoquant, that's the best you can do. So in the long run, you're minimizing costs here. You can't do any better. But if I am trying to expand production from 100 units to 200 units, what do I have to do? I have to go and use the wrong level of capital to produce 200 units. So I'm going to produce out here, where I'm using labor, this much labor in the long run, and this K star unit of capital. So for producing 200 units, what's the right level of capital to use, the cost minimizing level of capital to use? It's K double star, right? If you're stuck in the short run and you started at 100, by expanding production, you are using a level of capital K star, which is suboptimally low, and as a consequence, yoga is going to punish you for your lack of short run flexibility, which really isn't your fault, but your short run costs are greater than your long run costs of producing 200 units. Okay? So the point here is, if you're in the short run, here, or in the long run, if this is your input combination, your average costs are going to be the same. But if you've expanded production, then the average cost per 200 units here is going to be higher than if you were in the long run and you got to adjust your amount of capital. So here you're using the wrong level of capital, and your average costs are higher than if you were to use the right level of capital. Now, I acknowledge fully that this is a hard and crazy picture, which is why I'm going to make you better off by drawing an even crazier picture, okay? Let's do it. Look at that. That's the biggest set of axes we've seen all semester. This is also the biggest set of axes you will see all semester. So, questions? No? Okay. Long run versus short run average cost curves. I'm just going to worry about average cost and maybe draw the occasional marginal cost curve in here. Where's my crazy picture? I drew it. Just so you know what's coming your way, this is coming your way. Are you ready for it? You can't see it in the back. It's probably better. You'd be scared. And fear never helps you do better at anything, except for running away from stuff. So long run versus short run average cost curves. So let's say I'm in the short run, okay? I want to produce Q1 units of output. So on the x-axis here we have Q. On the y-axis here we have dollars. So if you were to produce Q1 at least cost in the short run, this is your least cost way of producing Q1 units in the short run. Okay, so if you wanted to figure out what the average cost of production here is, it'd be P1 dollars. P is a bad letter. That's not a good letter. That's going to be price. Let's call it $1 letters. That's even worse notation. But the point here is that this is your short run average cost. If you wanted to produce at minimum average cost right in the short run, if you use the right level of capital right here, this is the least cost you can produce Q1 units at. Okay, this also has associated with it a level of capital. Right, so short run average cost 1 has K1 units of capital. Now, if you wanted to expand production to, let's go crazy, to Q2 units, what happens to your average cost of production in the short run? Does it go up? It goes up. It goes up because you're stuck with K1 units of capital. Right? So your short run cost of production, if you're with that level of capital, is now up here. Now, if you were in the long run, what would you do? Would you adjust the amount of capital you use to the optimal amount of capital? Yes. I see half the class yawning, about 10% sleeping, and the other 40% not going like this. So this is okay. So what would I do is I would change my level of capital. Would I stay on this short run average cost curve if I changed my level of capital? No. There'd be a different short run average cost curve with a different level of capital. Let's say this thing looks like, let's be, oh yeah, I'm going to draw something cool today. I'm feeling optimistic, a little bit arrogant. That's always bad. I've changed my level of capital to the now long run optimal, really cost minimizing level of capital. And now I can produce Q2 at this much lower average cost here because I adjusted the level of capital. So here you can see in cost space, this is the average cost of walking down the short run expansion path versus this is the average cost of producing Q2, let it be 200 units, of actually adjusting capital and using the optimal input combination. Right? So if we go back to our previous picture for 1 second, the label on this isocost curve here divided by 100, which is the units of output, is going to be this number right here, right? And the label on this green isocost curve right here divided by, sorry, I said 100 units, right? Let's be clear. The label on this isocost curve here divided by, why is Max dividing by 100 units? This is the 200 unit isoquant. That's because Max is an idiot, right? No, he's not, but he's sloppy. So the total cost here divided by, we're at the 200, right? So label on the right isocost here divided by 200, that is going to be this point right here. And the label on the green isocost curve divided by 200, that's the average cost of producing 200 units in the short run, is going to be this number right here. So we could do this again, right? Let's produce more. There's some very interesting debates as to whether consuming more crap is actually good for us as a species, but we're not going to talk about this today. But I think that's a really interesting debate. So you could keep on going. Q4, let's do a couple more. Right? I'm going to draw you some different average cost curves, which are minimizing average costs at each output level. Okay? So this here is short run average cost 4, K4, short run average cost 5, K5, short run average cost 6, K6. I apologize for swearing earlier. I'm no longer allowed to swear at home because we have a 5-year-old, so sometimes the pressure just builds up and a swear word slips out. So I apologize. I'll bring you a pound of chocolate for each time I swear for the rest of the semester, and so to the last lecture. You guys are going to walk out here on a sugar high. So I've got a bunch of short run average cost curves. So let's say you're in the long run. Any volunteers here? I'm going to ask you some questions for money. Anybody? All right. So let's say I wanted to produce Q3 units and you're in the long run. Which level of capital would you use? That's right. How about you wanted to produce Q6 units in the long run? Which unit of capital, which capital amount would you use? That's right. One more. How about Q1? That's right. Right. So you answered 3 questions right. I only have $2, so you get $2. It's three right answers for $2. Thank you. So what you're saying is, in the long run, you would hop from short run cost to short run cost by picking a level of capital that lets you minimize the average cost of producing your output. So in the long run, what you're doing is you're picking the minimum level of average cost by adjusting your level of capital. This is going to be amazing. I don't know if you're ready for this. I don't know if I'm ready for this. So in the long run, I don't know if I can draw